Pamela, would you like to tell us about what it is that brought you here and why you feel it's important just now?
Okay, well, some of the people in this room have been talking about this for many years. Just looking for something, some new way of, different ways of working with communities. And what the journey took us to, just a small group of us, was to meet academics and business people, government officials who had the same dilemma. I worked in local government. I also met social entrepreneurs. I met lots of different types of people, people in the health service, people in education. And we seemed to have the same problems, that we were quite frustrated that we couldn't use our whole energy, our creativity in our work. And we really passionately wanted to learn and to do our jobs really well, but somehow we're being stifled. There was lots of paperwork and bureaucracy. And anyway, I found out this thing called systems thinking, because somebody told me, you've got to speak to somebody in Aberdeen in the Deming Learning Network, Gordon Hall. He's saying a lot of these things that you're sort of talking about. So of course I picked up the phone and I said, what's this about the Deming Learning Network? And he told me, it's about the whole system. It's not about the individual or one particular manager. It's about the whole system. And that's why, you're finding that you're coming against the same thing in all of your silos. And I hadn't heard the word silos before, but then I realised that, yes, I was in a silo. I was talking in a certain language. And then what happened was when people came together, we thought, let's bring people together, let's talk and see how we can solve this, because we're not going to solve it from somebody outside, so we're going to solve it together. And that's where I met Jim and other business people, and I was kind of out of my league a bit. I'd never heard of organisational development and all these names like Otto Scharmer, but the one that did really hit me was Margaret Wheatley, who was a leadership development, organisational development person, who also really appealed to me as somebody who works in community development. She really spoke to me, her writing, the word emergence, just allow things to happen, work with the living systems. And all that language really appealed to me, and I thought, wow, I want to know more about this. And over time, Margaret Wheatley, actually, we talked about Margaret Wheatley, we talked about silos, we talked about how we all had different languages, but we didn't know how to solve the problem. We just knew there were problems. And what happened was that activists wanted to be active, and they kind of went away when we had meetings because they just thought they're out talking, and it wasn't working. But then I heard about art of hosting. It was actually through Colin. Colin said, have you heard about art of hosting? And I hadn't. And Margaret Wheatley, funnily enough, was coming to Scotland. Rory MacLeod, one of our colleagues, had invited us because he was one of the people talking about this new way of doing things. And Margaret, at that meeting in Glasgow, I think it was the first time I've ever seen so many different types of people. The silos were in the room, and people from government, all the people I mentioned earlier were there. I thought, wow. And then the week after that, I signed up for Art of Hosting in Norfolk. The first one that I could do, I'll have to do it. And I think it's the voice on the end of the phone that just, when I heard Linda saying, I thought it looked a bit weird. Is it really for me? I've been to Findhorn, I've done all these things before. I'm not sure it's going to work with my particular community education. Is it that kind of thing? But it wasn't. It was actually practical, it was real, it was something that could be applied in communities, in businesses and organisations. And that's really it. And then here we are tonight because I invited the hosts over, and one of them is sitting across from me, and he's called Toka Mono. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you, Tom.
Good evening. How do you say what this is in 3 minutes? The Danish queen, she always comes to help me. Margrethe II. A few years ago, she speaks to the nation every New Year's evening. And she writes her own speeches, and this is an elder speaking to the people. She's a lovely woman. She said this that penetrated into my gut. What if, she asked the question, what if the reason for all the disharmony and the wars in the world is because of the conversations that never took place? And I just couldn't forget this, that never took place. So I'm lived for a long time now in the question of what are the conversations that if we would have them earlier would prevent some of that stuff? And what are the skill sets? What are the practices? I'm completely with the gentleman over there saying that, you know, many people understand this, but who dares get 100 people or 1,000 people together in the same room who may have difference of opinion and host a conversation that will actually lead somewhere? That takes skill, takes courage, it takes heart, and it takes maybe the simplest and most profound thing of all, just to be a human being, so you meet other people as human beings. That's our birthright, guys and girls. And so that sets, and some of us then just decided, I used to, you know, organize conferences, and in the end, I began to fall asleep in them, myself, organizing them. Because you had 13 keynote speakers bombarding 500 people with their knowledge. And then you had dialogue, which was to pass around a microphone for a couple of minutes and say, now we've had dialogue. So paradigm shifting, how may we meet differently? What are the skill sets that it takes as us as leaders who are not afraid that other people are also leaders, which is this participatory leadership thing is really not a concept. I think it is a practice. We all know it. We do it with each other as friends and in our communities. Anybody gets on the high horse and play hierarchy back home. At least in my family, it won't work, I tell you. And it won't work with my friends either. So why do we think that it works where we go to work? And so before I pass this on to Ursula, I want to say, there is no mystery to this. Sometimes people get to talk about out of hostiness. This is not the new fad. This is very, very ancient. Human beings have always known in all cultures, all tribes, that when we don't know what to do, we get together and we talk about it, and we ask the real questions, and we work on it, and then when we find some clarity, we will roll up our sleeves and we will go out. And we are not afraid, or even if we are afraid, we don't care that we are afraid, we will just go out. And begin to try and act and see if we could learn how to live better together. And I think it's such a time. And then the rest of it, of course, is understanding it, having some good tools, and then putting it to good use. And I'm here to support that because I've seen it work in so many places around the world. From, you know, Ursula will share about how this, you know, has been helpful with the European Commission. This works in villages. This works with First Nation groups around the world, between networks. I haven't seen it not be able to work in any place yet if it is done from the human being to the human being, and with some skill and some courage. So, and I love the idea we can sit here and play and tell stories around this ancient practice that you have kept alive. In so many countries in Europe, this is gone. So, whenever there's a Kaylee, I'll show up. I don't mind if there's beer on the table, but that can be later. So, to my friend Ursula, who just to say thank you for the effort of coming here. This was not an easy journey, and for coming from where you're working, but I know she had beautiful stories to share. So if you'd share a couple, thank you.
Thank you. So we've had the Art of Hosting conversations in the European Commission since about 2006, and I was so grateful to see that we have a tool, because it's not just the attitude and the wish. We had similar observations as Pamela shared, the silo thinking. We are a huge organization, and I'm working in a very central place now for the last 8 years, where we are helping our departments to get good procedures done. But nobody ever thought about processes and trust and relationship and sharing, because in the organization most of the knowledge isn't at the top. It really is everywhere, and normally we don't know where it is. You only know where it is when you ask people what they know, what they care for, and what they have to share. And then maybe others go, oh, this is a similar issue. I want to learn from that person, but how do I know what I can learn if I don't even know who has what I need? So we started to apply it in a very practical way. We do have trainings, but we are practitioners. And I started out very soon of organizing a community of practice on strategic planning that became a bit bureaucratic. And we had 41 departments doing the same thing but not connected. Only in meeting rooms like this one, maybe even larger with microphones and video conferences to other places. How can you share what's on your heart if you are behind a microphone and not trained to connect, to really connect to what is important? So we learned how to build a container that was safe, where there was no hierarchy, although people would come from all strengths and backgrounds and levels. So a director could be next to a secretary and they could share something because they shared what the purpose was of meeting. And suddenly this structured thinking started to break away, because trust replaced the fear. And it didn't matter, we realized, what is the area? Is it strategic planning? Is it health? Is it social enterprises? Is it environment? It really didn't matter what the object, what the policy was. What mattered was that there were a few people in place who cared about their jobs enough to do something in a different way. And this is how we are connected to each other inside. So I am not in the training and development unit, I'm still in my core business. But I'm helping others to run conferences, and sometimes we have meetings with 1,200 people. It's been our largest one before Christmas in Strasbourg with young people. We'll have soon another event in Strasbourg with 5,000 people on Europe Day, and I'm helping out another department. I'm not at all connected, others through this practice. And we ask young people, what can you tell Europe? Because we're so used to the old paradigm that we tell everybody what we think, but most people are not even interested. So we are now teaching each other inside, how can we listen better? How can we listen? We are supposed to host Europe. So how can you host if you're not listening? So we are now learning how to listen again. And this is not mainstream. We have about 40,000 people all over the world, mostly in Europe, and about 1,200 have been trained. But many more have been touched and been in world cafes and in settings like this, and learned, oh, this is a great way to exchange. Because they've been sitting in conferences next to each other, not really getting down to the matter. But with this format, sitting in fours, you start to talk to each other and learn, and people leave the room after 2 days with so much more knowledge, information and relationship, that they can do their work back home in their member states in a very different way.
Thanks much, Ursula. It strikes me sitting here in the Scottish Parliament having a conversation in a really beautiful, sunny, warm day, and it does seem out of the ordinary. And I hope that actually changes and it becomes part of the ordinary, Because when I remember the Parliament got going, we were talking about it, and it was about doing things in a different way, having small groups, having small meetings where people could get engaged and we could get close to government, and we can get close to making decisions. And I've been trying to do that for a long, long time. I've been working in the third sector in Scotland since the early 2000, and been trying to use different approaches, social enterprise, been one of the main things that I'm doing. And my interest in that is because I think we need to change something. There's an urgent need at this moment in time across the world for us all to begin to engage in living life differently, or else we won't have much of a life to live. And some of these symptoms are already happening. So in the work that I was doing, I felt that I was having quite a lot of success. The work in social enterprise was beginning to take off. Initially, people didn't have a scooby what we were talking about and weren't really interested. And now it seems like everybody's interested in that. I've been working on social capital for a long time, which is about networks of trust, shared values. And values are really, really important, I think, in terms of finding those common agendas. And so one of the things that I did was that I set up a forum for people who are interested in taking the theory of social capital and putting it into practice, and came across Manfred Hellriegel from Austria also from Bregenz, which is quite interesting. And Manfred and I have been trying to build a network of individuals who are interested in this idea of trust and finding ways to build trust so that change can happen without somebody having to lead from the top. And after a number of years, I think we're into the 6th year of the World Forum, and also the work that I'm doing in Sensco. We had an annual Ceilidh, which is a good way of bringing people together, and the original meaning of the word Ceilidh is gathering. And so, it's nice that we're using that terminology tonight. But I remember saying to Manfred that I felt that I was quite lonely. And despite the fact that I could feel there was a change needed and there was a change in the air, I was feeling that something wasn't happening, and Manfred said, yeah, but you can't actually convince people logically with your argument. What you've got to do is connect with the heart. And he kept it, and we were using art of hosting methodologies, and he talked about it in the World Forum. He said, you've got to do this training. It's not really something you can describe exactly, you have to experience it. So I went and did training with Toka and Monica in Denmark, and it totally blew me away. And you come away from that and you're speaking a completely different language and nobody's got any idea what you're talking about. And they're thinking, what is he, And some of them think, I want some of that. And that began to happen here in Scotland through the Art Hosting Scotland group, and the fact that we were able to connect with Toka, and Manfred has also been a big support, and I also built a relationship with Anna Karen through that training in Denmark, who works for the Swedish equivalent of COSLA. And they also are feeling that there is a distance between the people in the communities and the governance process. So this is something that really everybody really needs to get involved with. And one of the things that I think that, for me, it describes this process of moving away from a hierarchical process, a patriarchal process of power and dominance, where you have these big conferences when you're sitting beside 200 or thousands of people, and you only ever speak to the people you knew before in the first place anyway. What a waste of time and energy. So to work with people in small groups allows us to become human again and to start making decisions based on human approach. And Monica said something one day to me. She said, hosting is the reason we use the word hosting is because if you think about it, if you're having dinner with guests, do you facilitate them? You host them. So the art of hosting seemed that to me.
So if by any chance you're sitting there thinking you might like to join this week's conversation, please do. It might be just to say you came along to that event and what touched you about that, or it might be to challenge something, well, you know, who knows? But, we've got a few extra minutes here. Might be to invite Tuka or Colin or anyone else to elaborate a bit. It's just a different way of having a sort of conversation. Great man. I got you eyeing me up. And if you're sitting around the table and feel like your time's finished, you can always leave.
I wanted to just come back to the point made there by the gentleman back there about putting it in practice. And one of the things I found, my name is Serge, by the way, Serge Marty. One of the things I found amazing with the few people that I've spoken to who've been at New Battle, so many are putting this into practice immediately. You know, there's so many things taking place that were already happening, but that have gotten a new impetus and a new way of doing things. I know Mike has applied it in you know, Fife Diet, and was just speaking just now with various folk who are using it in different ways. You know, and it's very exciting seeing that. So immediately, that is what's happening. It's not just staying at the level of something theoretical. And I've applied it, not in Scotland, but in my work with indigenous peoples, particularly in Indonesia. And I just had one contrast, which was going to a conference, a bit like what Toke was talking about, and it was people from all over the world. It was such an opportunity. This was one I attended. I wasn't part in organising, and it was people from communities all over the humid tropics, and they were telling their story, and it was one speaker after the other. And it was absolutely relentless. It was the saddest thing you could possibly imagine. You know, it was a snapshot of a world dying. It really was. It was shattering. Now, the week before, we had an event in the Longhouse. We weren't meant to have it in the Longhouse. It was meant to be in a hotel, but with energy from the art of hosting, I went and let's steal this away, this hotel, and go to the community and have it in the Longhouse. And it was a gathering of young indigenous leaders from the Philippines and Indonesia. And we used some of the art of hosting and other approaches, and the thing just flew. It was extraordinary. You know, it was something that these young leaders were energized, and one of the things they kept saying is that they felt deadened by the way that they've been on the receiving end of these conferences, and they just felt full of energy and life. And they were talking about the exact same issues that those other people at that other conference I was at the following week were talking about, but they came out of it with vision and passion and a sense that they were the ones who could do something about it, whereas the other people came out of it feeling just like damaged. So it's a beautiful thing, and I'm really glad that it's happening here in Scotland, where we're living a moment of democratic ebullition, but we're also in a place where we have so few councils. We have the worst, most undemocratic representation in Europe, right? So we need to use this energy to transform what's happening, and don't anyone foist the constitution on us, whatever happens. You know, we want to do it, all of us together. Thank you.
So I sat down here and I don't know what I'm going to say. So I am Sharon Miller. I am a leadership consultant in the NHS, with NHS Education for Scotland, and I was a member of the who experienced the 3-day event last November in Battlefield. And I remember at the end of that event, we were doing a final circle, and we were to say finishing words, final words. And my wise words were from my mum, and it was, "Does it feed your blood?" And this work actually does feed my blood. And I was thinking about that, and I think that's why it's important, is because blood is the energy that goes through our bodies, and from a healthy person, that's important. But one of the big policy changes that's affecting health is the integration of health and care. And conversations that I'm experiencing and noticing are around how can we integrate health and care. But the people that are having those conversations are those that are shaping the big guns, local authorities, health boards, and how do you get the voice of the people in that? And although this is all about democracy and all that, I can see a role for the approaches and concepts in the field of health to engage staff differently, to engage people differently. We've got self-directed support and all these other good things that are coming in that just seem to flow towards this work. Pamela talked about different theories and gurus and whatever. What I noticed at the Battlefield event was, we didn't have all the theory and the gurus mentioned, but it was there, deep, and all the work that was covered. And I'm an OD practitioner, and I do know the theories and some of the writings and good works of these people. But I experienced people just getting their sleeves rolled up and getting on with it. And I think leadership now needs people to get their sleeves rolled up and get on with it, to have conversations that they need to have. And we've lost the ability to be in conversation with people in a human level, because we're built in to be busy and to do the right things. But sometimes we can't do the right things because we don't see all of the picture. And I do think we need to teach ourselves to relearn how to listen, how to suspend our own judgment a wee bit, to think maybe there's another way here, and advocate for advocacy.
Very quickly, I'm really hugely impressed with what Ursula said, what I've heard Toka say about work at the European Commission. But the punters in Scotland, if you mention European Commission, my parents' steam would come out their ears, and they would think participatory. They would be totally. They couldn't understand that anything in Europe would have anything good, or European governments would have anything good. How would you measure the change? Because how would you measure the change over the period since 2006 and how things are better? Is there any way you could give me? Because we need hope. We need to believe in practices and processes like this. Could you give, in some way, give an indication of measurement? Is this like a quantum leap, or is it a slow process of evolution? Or could you just give us a wee indication? I'd just love to get some kind of a sense of hope and perspective.
To start with, that a chicken isn't fatter if you know how heavy it is. And I cannot really tell you because we have not done any classical survey, so I don't have any figures. It would be interesting to do interviews. I think there is a study on the social capital that was done by 3 people in Karlskrona at the Blankinger Institute of Management. So they found out some things, but I don't have any figures in my head. What was found and what I feel is that we are much more connected. And of course, we are not so stable. There are many people coming in and leaving again. However, there is a core of people who trust each other really well. And there are more and more people requesting this work to happen. So there is now by word of mouth and by publicity, because we have those newsletters sent out, it's like, oh, if I do a conference, maybe I want to do it differently. And there are more and more people fed up of experiencing what you explained earlier. What a waste of time of having what you call also death by PowerPoint, or one person talking after the other. So anyone who has remained alive and a little bit of courage will ask for help to have a conference differently. And the results are always so amazing that those who were in it never want something else again.
I've got 3 short things to say. First of all, one of the things that came out of the training we did was a phrase, it's about time we get above ourselves. As Scots, we've never, in however many years, certainly my time living in Scotland, and I think it's about time we get above ourselves. But what does that actually mean? There's two things. I think people are frightened. I'm excited, but there's also a bit of discomfort about what's going to happen on the 19th of September. People are beginning to see that whatever the result of the vote, Scotland will never be the same. In fact, the UK will never be the same again. I hear and read in various, particularly the Better Together campaign, about the status quo. I'm afraid there is no status quo. On the 19th of September, status quo is past. What's going to be different? So two things. One, at a national level, Scotland needs to have a Scotland-wide conversation about what is going to be the future of Scotland. And as I said, that's irrespective of whether the vote is yes or no, but in particular, if the vote is yes. Because a lot of people will have voted differently. They need to be engaged. That's timing me out, isn't it? The final piece I heard, some of you might have heard on Radio Scotland last week, and I just heard this snippet, which is about, it was interviewing somebody from the Inverness Courier newspaper. And the piece was about the decline in the circulation of national newspapers, Scotsman, the Herald. But what the article was saying was that there's a huge increase in the number of readers and circulation of the local papers. And they had the editor of the Inverness Courier on and said, well, what are people reading about? And said they're making connections. And he said one thing in particular, and I mentioned this to Pamela, he said the Inverness city wants to redevelop the city centre. I immediately thought of Tim Merry, who was one of our trainers, who's been doing exactly that in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where they're redeveloping the city centre. And he said the only forum, and this is the editor, the only forum where people are contributing to that discussion is in the newspaper. And you think, well, there is a crying need for conversations to be hosted, I think, at that local community level about what do the people want that matters in Inverness, and Dingwall, and Tame, where I come from, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Pilton, wherever we need those conversations.
It was Russell, it was your question. I have come from a place where we're funded to do this, so we have to count. You can count. Just ask people when you begin, do you feel included? Ask them in the middle, are you feeling listened? And at the end, if there ever is an end. But the other thing we counted, and it actually made a big difference, is how many people were involved. We started with 3, we grew to 40, we grew to 2,500, and then politicians heard those numbers, and we knew we were on the mark. So count, just count the number of folk that are involved, and keep coming back. They're the simple questions. So you look where you go.
Karen,
how many?
maybe just mention 2 sentences about where this is happening.
Does it matter? Yeah.
Yeah?
Australia. But we're just folk. We're just folk. And this was in an area that nobody, that government wanted to introduce change, they wanted people to be included. And I think at the very first session, some families and individuals said, we've heard it all before, hurry up and nick off. We want our lunch. That's what we came for. And from there, 3, 12, 20, but because of the methods, that people actually felt included. That's where it happened. That's enough, yeah? Yeah. But at one stage, a bureaucracy tried to get in there and say, well, thanks very much, shut up, sit down. Now we're going to talk about KPIs. So we also counted the murders, because that was the biggest reaction to say, you've got it right here and we're not interested in that. Once people experience this, they want to keep going. So that's so sorry, I didn't want to take up your time, but just kind of easy stuff.
My name's Trish Boyle and I work in NHS 5 and I was half an hour late for this session, so I feel I owe you an apology, plus I'm a bit nervous that I might say something that's already been said, but I thought I'd have a go anyway. So,
I often say that around the bar.
oh, okay. Okay. So, when I saw the art of hosting things, my first reaction was, bloody hell, just another branding of what I'm already doing myself. And I felt quite competitive. So I'll admit to that first of all. And then the title of tonight, Participatory Leadership, I just wanted to say in NHS 5 over the last 7 years, since I became the head of organisational development, I realised that when I got into the NHS, it was really difficult to get conversations going with all the different disciplines. So if you wanted to get service change, there were lots of numbers of people with lots of power to engage or otherwise in conversations. And mostly they didn't want to engage, and mostly they just wanted to attack each other. It felt to me initially anyway, but I've now got a lot of people who are really happy to do some of these participatory processes, you know, using Goldfish Bowls and listening to each other with real heart. And we have had some measures, you know, staff absences have gone down, where people feel so much better to work with each other, improve quality of services. But the key is, you know, developing the container, working with the leaders so that they're confident enough to host, and then dealing with probably some of the emotion, especially if it's a conflicted situation that you're hosting. So, and particularly helping the leaders work with people's emotions and their own, so that you can get past the conflict and into something really generative. And it's a fabulous thing when it works well. And even when it doesn't work well, it usually moves people a little bit on. And even if you have to kind of go away for a little while and then come back, it usually works. And anyway, even if it doesn't work perfectly, you know, it wasn't working before. So and usually nudge quite a few people who come back and say, a bit like one of the other speakers said, some people show an interest, and I have an aspiration to teach some of this more widely in the NHS and call it old dogs and new tricks, because, you know, I'm one of those old dogs that's learned new tricks, and it's been fantastic.
Thank you very much.